Good evening. Welcome to Hidden Histories, URBAN-15's unique e-magazine for arts, culture, and history in San Antonio. Tonight, in commemoration of National Poetry Month, we are dedicating the show to poetry. We will feature 3 alumni of the Young Pegasus project. Young Pegasus is a publication that began in 1927 and for 93 years has been hosted by the San Antonio Public Library and showcases the best poetry by high school students. The 3 alumni who will read tonight are Naomi Nye, Alice Canestaro, and former Mayor Henry Cisneros. Following their recitations, we're going to have an open conversation and some thoughts from playwright and poet Gregg Barrios. Thank you for listening and tuning in to Hidden Histories. Following the show, we will proceed back to Mega Corazon.
Hello, I'm Naomi Shihab Nye, and when I wrote the poem I'm going to read, I was Naomi Shihab. It was 52 years ago, and my family had just moved to San Antonio from Jerusalem, my father's home city where we had been living before that. And I was a person who loved to write from the age of 6. When I was 7, I started sending poems out to children's magazines. So I'd already been writing at this time for about 10 years. And my high school English teacher at the recently renamed Robert E. Lee High School, now called Lee, told me about the Pegasus Poetry Contest in San Antonio, and that it was a well-regarded, very old poetry contest that all students were invited to enter. I was excited by that, although I wasn't very contest-oriented. I believed that if you were a writing person, you should be willing to share your work any place you could. So I sent my poems in, and this poem was printed along with another poem. And in those days, they would have all of the students who were selected as writers for that year of Pegasus to go to KLRN TV and make a television show together. And I remember particularly a man named Bill Rips speaking about my poem with such kindness and clarity that I was amazed. It was like I was really being respected as a poet, and I was 16 years old. And then afterwards we had a reading among ourselves and a party over at the Whitty Museum. And these were students between 1st grade and 12th grade from all over San Antonio who were in that year of the Pegasus anthology. And I remember feeling a sense of community with these kids, none of whom I knew. I'd never met them before, but I felt like we are all writers. We have a tribe. We're like a secret little tribe in our schools of people who love to write. And it was a very important thing at the age of 16 to feel that I was part of a tribe. I had never really even seen that many people who liked to write all together in one place. My final year in high school, after that, I would go on to work on the literary magazine and organize poetry readings at the high school and do as many things as I could. But I felt very proud that San Antonio has the oldest poetry contest in the nation for young writers. So thank you, San Antonio Public Library, for keeping it alive all these years. and thank you URBAN-15 for paying attention to it. And here is my very old, but probably still timely poem called Jerusalem. The smell of ground coffee, of sesame bread and thyme, of donkey manure and frying eggplant, people walking and maneuvering through crowded alleys, soldiers with black mustaches, fierce eyes, nuns, bird-like creatures, clutching olive wood crucifixes, the beggar woman, bent back, shriveled face, gaunt bones, palm saying, please. Dead animals hanging from their tails, nauseating pink flesh, blood running in gutters, stench. A little child, big eyes, gnawing a piece of sesame bread and wondering about the tourists with sandals and beards and sunburnt faces who come and go and come again, who wonder about them. City of stone, sunlight on the roofs, of tiny places wherein live families. See through the doorway there, a family. Mangy cat runs, says, you don't belong here, go. Throw him a piece of sesame bread. He stops, tail between legs, distrusting. Walk on, look back. A starving cat, bread down gullet, slips into doorway, gone. The smell of food, Armenian food, Arabic food, Greek food, Jewish food. Everybody has his own food. Everybody thinks his food is best. They're all just about the same, actually. Confused city, beloved city. Pilgrims barefooted in December, kiss your stones and go home feeling a little bit different. Others walk by the stones and never see them, day after day, year after year. But they don't laugh at the pilgrims because somewhere, they have their own stones. More people, a steady flow, Bedouins with their sheep, the sheep which will be hanging by their tails tomorrow, the boys harassing tourists. Hey lady, hey pretty lady, hello, hello, everybody. A man, 87 years ago, he was a wondering child. Now he is a wondering old man who sits smoking a hubble-bubble, puff, puff, wonder, leathery wrinkles lining his fading eyes, puff, puff, music, the muezzin calling, plaintive sound, lonely plaintive call. It's late, go home, don't look back at the city. Tomorrow it will be the same. The same, nothing is ever the same.
Happy children in the schoolyard play, autumn leaves tainted golden honey, fall to earth, warm and gray. My day is sunny. Christ's Spirit already embraces the city. Browns, yellows, and golds of autumn are a sight to make wanderers look home wistfully. My day is sunny. Even helpless creatures realize that today there is little they need fear, for on a day of such innocence none can despise. My day is sunny. Workers bear their labors unconcerned. Housewives open their windows, magnificent. This is the day the poets yearned. My day is brilliant. Good morning, say people, and mean it. Leaves, trees, earth, all are crimson, copper, bronze, and scarlet, like a flame from a golden torch forever lit. My day is lucent. Today is the epitome of life. Today is love. Today is chipped heaven. My day is resplendent. Breaking from Dallas comes the bitter word that turns sunny day mournful black. O day of delightful unreality, O day absurd. A shot rang out. Our president is dead. The sky is gloomed with overcast. People stumbling along the street cast eerie shadows. Through the murky, obscene dusk, the flag lowers to half-mast. Day is dark.
You know, My Day with Sunny was, you were 16 years old when you wrote this poem. And so this is a pretty powerful piece for a 16-year-old to be writing. Give me some background. What happened? Who were you at that age?
Well, the best teacher that I had in high school and ever in my life was Brother Martin McMurtry at Central Catholic. And he is a person who I attribute to not only inspiring a love of reading and literature and poetry, but of shaking me out of a certain kind of insular shell. He put me up in front of the class to speak and read and read poetry and so forth. So I attribute a lot to him. He had given us an assignment the week that this was to be written to write a poem. On Thursday of that week, President Kennedy visited San Antonio and rode down Broadway, and the entire school was let out to go the 4 blocks over to Broadway and watch the motorcade as President Kennedy made his way to Brooks Air Force Base, where he spoke later in the day on the space program. That evening he went on to Houston, then he went to Fort Worth, woke up that morning, and went on to Dallas. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, in a math class, the first words crackled over the school speaker system that the president had been shot. Of course, it was a shock to everyone there and everyone else in the country, as we know. A half hour later came the official word, once again over that school system, that the president had died. And of course, in a Catholic school, first Catholic president, with Irish instructors, the Order of Brothers, it was a crushing moment. We were let out of school early, and I walked from Central Catholic on St. Mary's Street, along St. Mary's, all the way into the downtown to catch the bus home. And it struck me at the juxtaposition of a truly beautiful fall day. November, late November, leaves changing, weather cool, blue sky, what would otherwise be a really happy day, sunny day, suddenly rendered gloomy and sad by the events, which would only accumulate that weekend as President's body arrived in Washington. And then, of course, we know by Sunday morning, his assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was shot in full public view on television. So it was a massively moving, historic, tragic time. And I chose to write the poem about my feelings of that weekend. I will say, as I read it in years later, that there's a deeper theme there that has always been one of the kind of the themes in my mind, unresolved aspect of life that I am perplexed by, which is the juxtaposition of what you don't know and then occurs that changes everything. That juxtaposition finds its way into this poem, and it's been, for me, I've always thought if I was a movie director, that would be a major theme of my work, to everything is normal, everything is daily, everything is routine, and then all of a sudden some dramatic thing that you could not have foreseen, did not see coming an hour ago, changes things. Maybe it's, I don't know, it's a bit of sort of fateful, somehow made it into my thinking and personality, but that's a theme that I think is a very important theme to me.
Now, poetry does allow for one really strong thing, is that the individual in a moment can capture an eternity in a short number of words. What, you know, the Young Pegasus program was a desire to collect those moments from young people in San Antonio.
Well,
and
first of all, for me, the beautiful thing about poetry is it allows you to use uncommon language, that you do not have to use the language of daily life or of business, but you can allow yourself to expand and connect things that are in many cases not connectable. The language of colors and the language of majesty and the language of feelings and such makes its way into the greatest poetry. I do love that. That's why when people say, well, today you're feeling poetic, they're talking about, you know, somebody who's gone beyond normal language. But it also allows for, you know, kind of deeper explorations into the spirit and so forth that I think are very important, and poetry does that. I will say that what Brother McMurtry provided, not just in this poem, but in his several years of teaching, enabled me later in life in politics and in other public presentations to go beyond just using the normal approach, but trying to explain to people things in their lives, take off the layers of the onion, find a truth, and then find the language that gets through. And I think, you know, for whatever in small measure I may have been able to do that, it was that instruction in poetry by Brother McMurtry.
the Young Pegasus program actually started in 1927 in San Antonio.
I didn't know that.
So it's 93 years old today. It still is continuing, now under the auspices of the San Antonio Public Library.
That's a great thing.
And it's a great thing. But I'd like to get your reflections on how programs like this, whether it be in science and math and poetry and music, how programs can be life-changing for a young person.
Well, first of all, I'm happy that the public library has taken it on because it's a worthy cause to continue, and because it is the purpose of a library to provide that kind of venue for the city's intellectual life. And to the degree that young people can be brought in, not just in poetry, but in things like engineering contests, medical contests, robotics contests, all kinds of things. You never know in the course of human life what thing is going to capture or stimulate a young imagination. Or even if it's not, if it doesn't put a person on a course toward a career, adds a dimension to their life that they use in their otherwise unrelated career. I mean, a doctor who thinks in poetic terms, you know, a person in another field who remembers their fondness for physics or engineering because of something they did of this nature as a young person. All of that's a net plus. We never know what the rewards and payoffs are for that. We just never know. Life is not that way that we can predict that. It's just the right thing to do.
One of the things about poetry is, from the listener's point of view, is it demands a lot of patience. And patience is something that has been seriously affected by the pace at which we're now living in our city. Any reflections with your...
Well, I think I would argue not only patience, but it requires also opening up, a kind of a suspension of cynicism, to allow yourself to open up and consider something that people are unburdening themselves of, or expressing a vulnerability, or sharing some sort of deep sense and feeling, and one has to be empathetic, one has to be gentle, and one has to be open to those things. Poetry, I think, does that, and that's why it's different from normal discourse.
Many times, people will often attack arts education and the inclusion of poetry and music and dance in our curriculum, and they want to move towards workforce skill sets.
Yeah.
How do you put the arts in perspective to those forces which say, we should be giving children the skills to find a job?
Well, clearly, many people today would look at the hard scientists, hard sciences or math, engineering related, technical skills, and say those are workforce related. Those are things we ought to prepare people for because they're going to need it in the workforce. But we're only now learning the way the human brain functions and the way it is enhanced by opening up other neuron paths, other cell systems in the brain to bring imagination and freedom, ideas of freedom and connections and synapses and that allow people to bring a real sense of creativity to other disciplines. So I clearly believe that arts, music, and poetry and language, literature and reading, education are an important part of a fully capable person. I think it's completely artificial and completely counterproductive to try to draw lines across the disciplines that way, because what we want to create is people who are balanced, people who can draw on different resources from their experiences and memories. I think then we have a whole person.
At the time of the 1969 Young Pegasus publication, I was the eldest of 8 sisters and brothers, still am. So there were 10 of us living with our parents near Kelly Air Force Base, finally in one place after moving almost every year of my life until about 1964. I was a senior at Incarnate Word High School, my first taste of staying at one school. Stability of location. I'd been elected student council vice president, but then when our president, Betty Ross, became ill, I served as acting president. Also, I was in the Central Catholics Glee Club and kept very busy applying for scholarships for college. This early recognition from Young Pegasus was a bright spot during a very demanding year. And getting recognition for doing something I love, playing with words. I wrote the poem in an opposite meaning form, also placing the words on the page in a pendulum swinging way. There's so much overlap with spoken word and visual art, negative space, patterning, rhythm. So the poem is about one of my younger sisters who was an ethereal beauty at the age of 15. She still is. The nuns demanded that we walk very demurely in the halls. No swishing, no swinging skirts. So to be included in the publication was very encouraging, and I enjoyed the fact that the PBS station documented it. We got to go to the station, but our words were read by adults, not by us, while the camera scanned our faces. I love having this opportunity to read my own words, so thank you very much. Both to Young Pegasus and to URBAN-15, this is the poem's first public reading by me. A most sexy walk she walked, off the cuff. Her hips pendulum swung slightly, somewhat defiant, most casual, like an indifferent stalking cat. Okay, there are ducks behind me. I've recently found out that the movement, the drill team movement that my sister was doing that inspired these 23 words was called the duck march or the duck walk, some reference to ducks. And so she's just amazing in her movement, very dedicated to the drill team. And so ducks, that's why they're ducks, because the thing is called a duck walk.
I thought maybe it was because ducks are so unsexy.
Ducks are so what?
Unsexy.
Ducks are so unsexy. Oh shit, did I say unsexy? I meant to say sexy. I was saying she was sexy, but I was saying she wasn't sexy just because she was so amazingly appealing as a young girl. So what can I say?
Greg, good evening.
Good
We
evening.
are, as one of the most renowned Chicano playwrights and poets that resides here in San Antonio, we're very interested in your thoughts right now on what is going on in the world.
Well, I'd love to, give you some thoughts of what I see happening. I think that the events that are transpiring with the coronavirus are, certainly a pandemic level. As a person who's been through several of these in different senses, I recall that I was born during World War II, which of course was, a world event where we were fighting against the Nazi regimes and the Japanese and the Italians. So I've known war, visible war, since I was born, the first few years. Later, at the age of 19, I was drafted into the military and served in Vietnam, which was another debacle that we got dragged into. And as a medic, a combat medic, or a qualified medical corpsman, I saw probably the large number of my fellow soldiers who were about the same age as I was, in their late teens or early 20s, fighting for a cause that we really didn't know what it was for. We were just sent by the government over there. And as a medic, I got to see young people my age who were barely, able to shave yet, dying and crying at the same time, and who never came back. And that was quite a jolt to a 19-year-old. Over 50,000 Americans died, not to mention the thousands and thousands of Vietnamese that were killed in that combat action. The third event that kind of was pandemic size was the AIDS pandemic in the 80s. It was until I think 25,000 men in the United States had died of this terrible virus that the president then, Ronald Reagan, decided to use the word AIDS. And we had to start organizations to combat, the government's insistence on not claiming that we were as valuable to the citizenry as anybody else. Of course, the fact that it was mainly gay people that were being affected didn't go well with a lot of other people. So we didn't have the kind of like consciousness, or we weren't as woke as we are now in talking about gender equality, etc. So very few people came out and gave us, the support we needed. Meanwhile, some of the best minds and talents of our generation were victims of the AIDS virus. We already are beginning to see, even now, that several of our famed playwrights are dying of coronavirus as well. It was Terrence McNally, who was from Corpus Christi, a Tony-winning playwright, and he just passed away from the virus. And there are other people that are, all theaters are closed. We're having to do this URBAN-15 event via the internet. And so it's put everybody in a bind, and so what I'm saying is that it's events like this that supposedly bring us together, but after the crisis is over, are we going to go back to this system that has, given us very little, and we are taxpayers, we've given our lives in the service, and we continue to work together with other people. And hopefully this is the time where we need to reflect, sitting at home instead of watching soap operas. Maybe we need to think about how we can reach out to the greater majority in San Antonio. I think poetry is important because people love poetry. I'm going to give you a for instance. I was the arts and book editor at the Express News in 2001 when 9/11 happened. Of course, it was, we didn't know what was happening. New York, again, was the center of the attacks. And we issued several extra editions of the newspaper. But a funny thing happened in a sense. We started receiving letters from the readers. And at that time, the Express News was a full-paged kind of newspaper, with, 60, 70 pages every day, And so we were, this was really before the internet hit, and kind of busted what the newspaper business was doing. So we got all these letters, and they were not letters of, well, who did this or who's behind this or, in this. It was, they sent in poetry. And I was like amazed, that we were receiving poems. And they were from people of all walks of life, young kids, older citizens, and just every background you could think of. Some of them were in Spanish, a few in German. We have a large German population as well in this area, in Czech as well. So it was important, and I went to my editor at that time, and Bob Rivard, and I asked him if he would consider publishing these heartfelt messages of poetry in the paper, and he readily agreed, and we put 2 entire full-sized pages just with poetry. And I'll tell you, it just made people feel so good. As a result of this, 3 months later, I suggested that the San Antonio Express News, on the book pages, start a poetry column where readers could send in poems. He agreed to that as well. I enlisted Naomi Shihab to be the first person to read the poems and select one every week. And Naomi now is the poetry editor for the New York Times. So wow, look at that. And so that column is one of the few in the United States that publishes a poem every week on Sunday. And the wonderful thing is that we get writers who are well-known, famous writers, and we get a person who perhaps just has one poem in their repertoire. And that this is going to be the 20th anniversary of that. And I'm very proud of that. And I think it shows that poetry does have an important part in people's lives, be it a rhyming couplet, be it, just some kind of like roses are red, violets are blue. But we are a very musical population here. And I'm sure that follows through in other cities, but even more so aquí in San Antonio. Yes, I'd like to read a couple of poems, and then I'd like to close with a poem by someone that you asked us to, that we admire, and I'd like to read one of their poems. This poem is from my last collection, La Causa, and it has an emblem at the beginning of it. It's called, and I quote, "He blossoms and he withers like a flower, fleeting as a shadow, transient." This is from the book of Job, 14:2. The name of the poem is The Flower Thief, and it's dedicated to a student of mine when I was teaching in Crystal City in the 70s, when we had the famous Chicano walkout. And this student was an excellent student, and he later moved to New York on a grant. And unfortunately, it was during the AIDS crisis, and he passed. But I have very vivid memories of what he did while he was in Crystal, and when I met him and saw him in other places. This is called The Flower Thief. I beamed, a surrogate dad, as you arrived out of the blue, New York Sunday Times in hand, knocking at my door that night. Knocking at my door that night, filled with birds of a feather chatter we made until dawn. Planning our annual pilgrimage, gay south of the border, caballeros bound for exotic Mayan flesh pots. I saw my own wild streak in you, Greek-bearing, gifted exchange student, home on holiday in Texas. Xmas Day, getting high, listening to Sissy and Lala wailing, "Band on the run, band on the run," to a stoned mariachi beat, overdosing on that year's gossip, eating your jefitas menudo, feeling life could really begin before 40. When I took that sabbatical in 78, we spent our last night and New Year's together, Nuevo Laredo, cantinas y congales, driving back, dark snow clouds, my limo zoomed toward San Anto for your midnight flight to Brooklyn. Heights on the road retelling myths, your boys' only graduation soiree, Queen Bee, traipsing over snoring drones, abandoning a humble hive. I'm only moving on, vatos, in search of better days. Ahí te guacho. A New York native born and bred was your calling card, an anthem. I moved to LA on long distance. You insisted that I will survive. Was a mantra to gay city souls who had braved the year alive. The last time you returned home, we missed each other by hours at the crew. I punched a new air. I'm a victim of the very songs I sing as I left the popper-perfumed bars for the streets. I took my blood pressure today, 130/90, a 65 pulse, still high. My apresyline and Inderol pale to the big chill of your hit and run on sentence, an elegiac intimation of mortality. Outside now, the faded limo parked, its shocking blue paint oxidized. I sat on the carpet, hippie Indio style. Kate Bush was whispering, "We're cloud bursting, Daddy," who never succumbed to temptation as we. At 16, you led a candlelit march for fallen Chicano vatos in Nam. Long live la raza, but let's live too, you said. Your words echoed in the freezing air, the candles caked, wax a trail of tears on my raised, clenched fist. Rest in peace, Cleophas. This next poem that I'm going to read for you is also, I think, has a little history to it. I've often felt that in a city where the majority is Latino, Hispanic, Mexican American, Chicano, as you will, has left our Spanish behind, the Spanish language. We no longer have a prensa in San Antonio. I worked briefly at Rumbo, which was the first Spanish language newspaper daily in San Antonio after I left the Express News. And it was very successful because it reached the Latino community, especially the new immigrants who, had no way of reading a daily newspaper in their language. Unfortunately, that's when the newspaper boom happened, collapsed. And so it lasted a good 2.5, 3 years. And I'm very proud of the work that we did. And it also leaves a big hole in our city. And I also feel that that also is a hole in the arts community. And as a quote before the poem, I'd like to read something that Carlos Fuentes wrote, the great late Carlos Fuentes. He once said when he was reading some of his works in Spanish to an all-white audience, he said, "Monolingualism is a curable disease." And then he proceeded to read in Spanish. This poem, excuse me for doing that, poem, it's poema. A un amor que nunca llegó a ser. And it's dedicated to the great cantautor Juan Gabriel, who made it known that he didn't have to cross over into English to be successful around the world, to be the most interesting. And it's funny, but Selena started her popularity by singing in Spanish, even though it was, her second language, not her first. And it's important, I think, that we take that pride and that joy in it. So this poem is written for Juan Gabriel, who I got to know quite well in several interviews I did for the LA Times and for several magazines. And it's called, again, A un amor que nunca llegó a ser. Nunca estaré feliz, pero hubo un momento cuando yo te quería, entonces todo lo sentía, cuando eras toda mi vida, que ahora terminó en algo triste y gris. Nuestro amor iba a comenzar, nuestra vida ahora perdida. ¿Para qué te voy a engañar? Fui el cobarde en no decírtelo. Siempre me hacías muy feliz. Pero en vez de gritártelo, tomé el papel de un infeliz. Nunca quise ser el solitario. ¿Por qué no me sacudiste con cariño para matar el ladrón melancolía que dejó estas cenizas de amor? Fui el único que te quiso, soy el único sin tu amor. Viviré mi vida triste y gris. La paloma a mi corazón no avisó, solo fue la palabra que me condenó. Ya ni besos pueden despertarme, ya no, ni puede ningún perdón. Ya no tengo nada de qué olvidarme, porque solo estoy sin ti, mi corazón. I always have a little quote, a little epigraph, if you will, at the beginning of my poetry. This one is Santa Mónica, Madre de San Agustín, reza por nuestros hijos de la chingada. Boulevard of Broken Noses. Chapter 1, Hollywood 101 Freeway, Santa Monica Boulevard exit, day 1. Romeo thumbed a ride to LA on a farm-to-market road truck. Man on a mission improbable to be a Latino James Dean. It's a long haul from Salinas to selling fresh strawberries by the basket, juicy oranges by the bag on the exit ramp. Glaring in the sun, stripped to his waist, body a glistening, La Raza billboard, UFW Eagle, stretches peck to peck. His sweaty back, Technicolor. Virgen de Guadalupe Buddha icon with an emblazoned legend of Viva la Causa, Viva la Raza. From the corner of the freeway, the Hollywood sign, a beacon glowing white in the distance. An SUV arrests his attention. For fresh berries, Romeo hands him a basket, but he drives away without paying. Fucking wetback, get a job. Chapter 2, Warner Brothers, Hollywood, Santa Monica Boulevard, a year later. Romeo, a mannequin, a street mime, painted silver, a tableau vivant, fresh from a cattle call for zombie extras at Warner's. He aced the job, 2 days' work. He feels cocky and hard in black studded jacket, latex surfer shorts, bare chest thumbing his shorts down to his Águila Mexicana tattoo, beak peaks on the bench, awaiting the number 5 bus. midday traffic, halt, hip, soft parade, waiting for the light. His goatee smiles as a cougar in a Cadillac offers him a lift. Chapter 3, The Hollywood Hills, Los Feliz Boulevard, a month later. In the outdoor patio, Romeo gazes through his Ray-Bans at his needle-damaged arm, melting in the winter light. The revolver in his pants heavy. He kisses his glow-in-the-dark rosary to hex this day's death from last night's crash and burn. Final chapter. MacArthur Park, Wilshire Boulevard, 6 months later. Romeo awoke before dawn, confusing the shelter for his jail cell, touches his band-aided, broken nose, breathes deeply, showers, gets coffee, and walks outside. MacArthur Park, set of the rescue mission public service announcement shoot, alive with vendedores of fake IDs, fruit ices, kids on bikes, skateboards, moms pushing strollers, and dealers' drugs. His black jacket and bolo tie askew with makeup, and his bandaged nose, his street preacher character apes Jack Nicholson's noir role in Chinatown. Action! He preaches the Beatitudes, holding his Bible like an Oscar. Vagrants cast as the fateful fall as shots ring out. His Bible pierced, his young life saved. Cut! The director shouts as Romeo awaits the playback. An old wino approaches him. You remind me of a young James Dean. Romeo smiles and signs the piece of paper. An actor is born. I was asked to select a poem by a poet who I admired greatly. And I selected one of my generation, the poet laureate, or I should say the Nobel laureate of poetry, of literature, Bob Dylan. And I'd like to read to you All Along the Watchtower. I think it's germane to the situation that we're facing now, and even more so offers some consolation as well as some thoughts of where we're headed and perhaps what type of apocalyptic times that we are living through at this time as well. So here goes. All Along the Watchtower. There must be some way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. Businessmen, they drink my wine. Plowmen, they dig my earth. None of them along the line know what any of it is worth. No reason to get excited, the thief, he kindly spoke. There are many here among us who feel life is but a joke. But you and I, we've been through that, and that is not our fate. So let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late. All along the watchtower, princes kept the view, while all the women came and went, barefoot servants too. Outside, in the distance, a wildcat did growl. 2 riders were approaching, and the wind began to howl. Muchas gracias. Stay safe. Stay well. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in and logging on to Hidden Histories tonight. We're going to return to Mega Corazon, but I want to remind you, Hidden Histories returns on May 4th, and it's going to be an exciting show. Thank you.